Okay, so we're going to be covering quite a bit today, so I'll keep this short. My name is Chris. I'm marketing lead for ENFOS, and I'll be your host today. So a little bit about us for those who aren't familiar. At ENFOS, we provide a cloud software solution used by companies all over the world for organizing all aspects of their environmental liability management. Everything from lab data to financials and more. So here you can see some of the companies that use the ENFOS platform. You'll see a pretty wide range of industries covering chemical, manufacturing, transportation, government, oil and energy, and agriculture. So let's get to today's webinar, Beyond P2P, Why Complex Projects Need More. So who is this for? So this webinar is designed for executives in complex service management, tech professionals, and project and program managers that are implementing, evaluating, or even just considering systems that support the unique requirements of complex services. Pretty much anyone that wants to tackle the sometimes difficult question of how well are we really doing things and how much better can it get? So what will you get out of it? Essentially, a better understanding of what the right system for the job means for complex projects. Why is this relevant? Well, this is going to be relevant to you if you're using a traditional or out-of-the-box P2P system, because this webinar is going to illustrate why those generic P2P systems simply are not enough. These days, there's a trend of organizations mandating the use of enterprise P2P systems, even though they don't truly meet the needs of complex projects that some business functions have to manage. So we're going to unveil a new business model designed specifically for management of complex services at the enterprise level. So here's a look at what we're going to cover today. We're going to begin with a quick overview of P2P, followed by a look at the challenges that come with complex services. We're then going to look at the gaps that P2P poses when used for complex services. We're going to take an honest look at the changing landscape for the CFO and the CIO before getting into the best practices when it comes to complex services P2P. We'll conclude with what you can actually do about this before we get to the Q&A. We're also going to have something for you at the end that should be of great interest for you. So today we have Roger Well, COO and VP of ENFOS, leading us through the webinar. Roger has more than 30 years experience in the field and has dedicated his career to helping complex service organizations make a successful leap from low tech to high tech. We'll also have Michael Douglas, Director of Accounts at ENFOS, speaking, also with a decade of experience in the field and focused on guiding companies through their information technology evaluation and selection processes. So before I give it to Roger, I just want to let you know you should be able to submit questions throughout the webinar via the questions tab on your dashboard. We're going to try and save about 10 minutes for questions at the end. And with that, I'll pass it to Roger.
Thank you, Chris. And we want to thank everyone for attending today. And we're always happy to have repeat visitors to our webinars. That certainly tells us that we're giving some valuable information to businesses and their teams, including their consultants. So we do appreciate that very much. So as Chris talked about on the agenda, I'm going to start with an overview of procure to pay, talk about that a little bit, get everyone on the same page. Then we're going to talk about complex projects, which are generally executed through complex services. So we're going to talk about that realm. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening in the CIO suite with today's technology advancements when it comes to systems. And then we'll get into some solution discussions. So on procure to pay, this may be known in your organization as something different. You might use the acronym P2P. It might be called purchase to pay. It might have a few other names. But this is in general what we're talking about. The name procure to pay was basically created by the tech industry to define a class of software that's designed for this specific purpose. And as most of you know that have some experience with P2P, it's really designed to help organizations purchase and pay for products and services that they need to run their business. The major component of the P2P proposition has to do with the linkage of purchasing to accounts payable. So you can see we've got the purchasing steps in this process in blue, in the accounts payable steps in red. And this was was the primary value proposition of a purchase to pay system. And P2P systems do a lot of things well, as you can see on this chart. There's sourcing, which is on the front end of the purchasing process. Commodity and catalog requisitioning is another major area, all the way through order confirmation, receipts, invoices, and then payment processing. So P2P systems have added value to organizations and will continue to do that. I think that this picture kind of says it all. I don't need to say too much, but for the work that is being done by the teams that are on this call and that we work with, the P2P system just doesn't give them enough. And that leads us to the problem statement. And the problem statement can be worded a lot of different ways, but basically we find that executives that are running complex service businesses are being required to use the organizational or enterprise-wide P2P system, but they need more to effectively manage the work and the program. I've personally observed hundreds of millions of dollars in complicated project work being procured in a single line item through a P2P system. And when asked, does this do the job for you? The answer is always no. It's not. When you dive further into that and you say, well, where is the project detail in the project management being performed? We hear answers like, well, that's my supplier's responsibility. Or we hear things like, it's just not being done. We're just managing this to a total dollar value and hope that all goes well. Well, there is a better way, and that does create problems that we're going to talk about a little further. So now I'm going to shift gears and talk about complex projects and complex services. The business functions and the teams that we support are challenged by managing these complex projects. We want to spend some time defining this because it's critical for leadership to recognize the complexity and the unique management challenges brought about through these factors. On the definition here, you're going to see that this concept of interacting variables and sensitivities plays a key role in what defines a complex project. So here's an example of a environmental remediation complex project set of stressors. So if you're working in environmental remediation, or maybe even in asset decommissioning, you'll understand these. So you see a broad range of components here, from legal risk to regulatory risk to technologies, and even the science that's underground. That's our hydrogeology, the environmental risk, the demographics, and so on. So these are all interacting together to create complexity and to create challenges in managing these types of projects. And when you're tasked with managing hundreds, sometimes thousands of these within a program, then you obviously have a complexity multiplier. Other types of examples of complex services would include public works, infrastructure projects, defense, aerospace, energy. A lot of R&D projects are considered complex, construction, certain maintenance activities, and I've already mentioned environmental restoration, remediation, and then also asset decommissioning. So if we make it more general, and we go back to the general complex project attributes, this chart is really outlining those for you. And again, when you look at each one of these individual components, you could spend an entire webinar just on each one. But we have things like ambiguity involved in the complex project, right? That's the vagueness of what are we trying to do? How can we get this completed? How long will it take? Uncertainty, unpredictability, the interrelationships, the dynamics, the external influences and the suppliers. Because for most organizations, this work, this complex project work is being outsourced. So we have suppliers, vendors, and all kinds of specialists. And then we have the scale dimensions. You've all heard of the mega project, right? Well, not all mega projects are considered complex, but many are just because of their scale. But you also have the project management trilogy scale in time, cost, and scope. One last descriptor to drive home the point about complexity. So many of you know the concept of the butterfly effect. It certainly wasn't designed to describe complex projects, but if you look at the definition, I think that you'll see that the same conceptual basis behind that effect does apply to the work that we're all tasked with doing. Small changes in the initial conditions can create a significantly different outcome. And let's face it, for our projects, it's not just the initial conditions, it would be also all of the future conditions, because many complex projects are running 10, 20, 30, 50, even greater than 50 years. The two main consequences or problems that are created by complexity fall in these buckets: unintended consequences and making sense of a situation, either what happened, what's happening now, or what's going to happen in the future. Because in reality, as managers and leaders, these are the things that we are trying to control and manage. The unintended consequences can be as basic as being over budget, unexpected change orders, reforecasts that are higher than anticipated, scope problems, and so on. Making sense of a situation is how we all make decisions. So all the decision making caused by complexity and having a vantage point around that is what's critical in terms of these negative outcomes. Okay. So I'm going to start shifting a little bit and talking about how organizations and what the research shows around companies that are tasked with this, how they're dealing with it. And then we'll loop it back into how does this relate to purchase to pay. So best in class, a highly mature organization responsible for project complexity, they'll follow some kind of a general model like this. Number one, they have to recognize the complexity, right? And it's not just the business owners of the function responsible for this, but it needs to be throughout the executive suite of the organization. Number two, obviously assigning competent leaders and resources. Number three is highlighted. So that's a special meeting for us today, but that is to select the appropriate management approach commensurate with the complexity profile. Right? That's one of the key takeaways today. It's why we have that bolded. Your projects, your portfolio have a complexity profile that needs special attention. And then number four, manage complexity dimensions holistically using systems thinking. If we break down complex project management requirements, you can start to develop quite a list. So we've done that. And there's obviously could be more, but you see things in here like planning, forecasting, reforecasting, scenario planning, decision support, stage gates, and so on, right? This is a long list of very important requirements for a successful best-in-class complex management service organization. You do have P2P in here, right? It's over at the bottom right-hand corner. It's a part of what needs to be done to effectively manage this work. So let's pivot now and talk a little bit about what's happening in the C-suite as it relates to technology. So these are some trending items that would be discussed in the C-suite, the CIO, maybe the CFO of the organizations. They're determined to deliver digital transformation. You all know that. There's a lot of money been spent and a lot of projects around information systems. The backbone technology is pretty much in place now. Those are your big ERP systems driving your businesses. They know that the enterprise standard P2P may fit about 80% of the organization. They also know that there are gaps for the other 20%. And generally, the other 20% include business functions that are managing complex services and projects. These require a much higher level of engagement. So if we have two people in the C-suite talking to each other, this might be their conversation. The ERP Megasweet myth about a single system for everything has died. Now, this isn't a shot at the ERP systems. They're necessary, they're critical, business critical, they're the system of record. However, they cannot do everything for every single business function. My CIO is finally comfortable with cloud security, right? That has been traditionally an obstacle, but as cloud security and cloud applications continue to grow and mature, this is becoming less of an issue. There are standards now out there to manage this. There are software applications that focus on complex service management. That is a company like ENFOS. These companies and ENFOS have specialized in helping companies deal with those complexities in a holistic viewpoint. They have systems that meet the complexity profile of the work being performed. And then finally, systems integrations are easier and less expensive, right? So that's another truth that exists out there. And to know that integrating a system designed specifically for complex service management with the ERP and the P2P is technically not a challenging project. Okay, another slight shift in conversation. I've been talking about technology, but let's talk about people for just a little bit, because managing businesses and these complex projects, it is all about people. And we have to have leadership. But there is a dilemma that I want to point out when it comes to this. So if you look at the literature from academia and you look at business cases put out there by industry, when they talk about complex project leadership, they'll point to these competencies above the line as being the most critical. They need strategic thinkers. You need to focus on advocacy for the organization, manage stakeholders, manage communication, manage people, manage suppliers, right? These competencies below the line are mentioned as not as important, less focus, and would maybe give us a smaller gain. These are the activities like process management, transactions, controls, IT, reporting, and back office. You're probably starting to figure out what the dilemma might be here. And we're pointing that out. Without the right IT systems in place for complex projects, time is wasted and high-value tasks don't get done. Okay, that is the dilemma. I'm going to back up because I'm sure many of your organizations during your annual deep dives, your quarterly reviews, your financial close periods, whatever they may be, your monthly billing process, your people are spending a lot of time on those below-the-line activities because of inefficient systems or integrations. Okay. So let's get into some solution discussion. A complex project, the most traditional, the most proven, tried and true methodology that still exists out there today is to take a complex project and to break it down into smaller phases or projects. You also may call them stages, but it's the classic work breakdown structure model. We have something very complicated and complex. Let's break it down into something manageable. So you've all seen this and probably are already managing your work this way. Within each phase, you'll have a best management practice that looks something like this. We're going to scope the phase. We're going to plan the phase. We're going to then execute that work. And the execution of the work is probably going to be performed through multiple scopes of work. So we have SOW A, B, C, and X. That is where the procure-to-pay system fits into this overall master process, because I'm taking my scopes of work that are generally project management detail layered, and I'm moving those over to procure-to-pay so I can get a purchase order to my suppliers for doing the work, and then obviously the invoicing and spend management. Once my execution activities are done, I will close that phase. I'll make a determination on my next phase. Do I need a next phase or not to execute this complex project? If no, we'll close out. If yes, I'm going to repeat that loop for my next phase. Okay, so that's your classic model of managing a phase broken down complex project and how procure to pay fits within that. At ENFOS and customers and consultants using ENFOS, we have taken that to another level, and we have integrated planning, proposals, purchases, and invoices into a master workflow that we call Project Management Enhanced Purchase to Pay. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this, going through some of the details here, but bear with me because I want you to see the interconnectivity of these. So if we look at A, the planning bucket, this is where we're doing our scoping and planning, forecasting. We're also having decision support. We may be doing multiple scenarios, most likely a high or a low. We may be doing some other market-based value estimating, but there's our planning bucket. B, we're ready to start executing some work. So we need to get proposals that consist of scope, cost, and time, and those should be verified against some baseline plan. Now, if my plan in A is a 10-year plan, but I'm only executing work for the next 12 months, that's fine. That's what the proposal's for then. The scope over the next 12 months, the cost over the next 12 months, and then the time is obviously already defined. I can set in scope controls here as well. So with a system that's integrated between planning and proposals, I can make sure that only those approved scope items from my plan are available for my supplier's proposals. So that's an immediate scope control benefit. So now we have used our purchase to pay and we've created purchases. Once I have purchases, that gives me open commitments against the plan. An open commitment are all of my approved purchases less what I've already approved and spent. That allows the available to commit from the plan, approved plan amount to be calculated. That sets up a new control for us that's critical in the management of complex services, and that is that my cumulative purchases cannot be approved if they exceed my available to commit. If I can't commit the money, I cannot spend it. Therefore, I will not be over budget without a reforecast change. D, so we're on that same connector between purchases and planning. If I'm doing a plan reforecast, which most organizations do on these complex projects, because these are long-term projects, they're constantly reforecasting. I also need a control to make sure that my reforecast is equal to or greater than my open commitments. If I don't have that control in place, I might be reforecasting for a lower number than what I've already actually have committed to. Another control, but it's on the opposite side of the financial statement. E, we're now into the spend, right? Work is being done, spend is happening, services are being rendered. So my invoicing includes scope and cost controls verified against the proposal scope of work to a project management level of detail. Now, I don't have a chart comparing what you would see in a purchase to pay system compared to a complex service management system, but you can visualize it. It's going to be one line in a P2P system and says, here's your approved amount and here's what you've spent. On a project management level of detail, I'm down into task level, subtask level, and I'm using a standardized work breakdown structure across all of my projects in the portfolio. F, this is the connector between invoice and purchases. My PO balance calculation is now being done to the task level. And then finally, G, my connector from my invoices all the way back to my plan. So my plan balance calculations to the work breakdown structure levels, which means project management level of detail, is occurring automatically and in real time. So what you're looking at here is project management enhanced P2P. It broadens the definition of your standard P2P, and it fills those gaps that you would have to create shadow systems for or attempt to cobble together multiple systems to get the job done. So let's put it all together in a high-level business solution schematic. And that's what we have on this slide. So if we're looking at the left, in the gray area, that's the work. Those are our projects. That's our staff. Those are our wonderful suppliers. And we also have other stakeholders involved. They're managing their work in a complex service management system that's designed and built specifically for that type of work. That complex service management system then is integrating with the other customer systems, primarily those shown in the right-hand side, the ERP, such as Oracle, SAP, Lawson, Sage, Infor, or so on. Different procurement systems that sit in the ERP stack, Ariba, Emptoris, Coupa, and so on. Other applications, middleware, single site logon, web services. So this is the high-level schematic of how a specialized complex service management system fits in on the front end of the corporate systems and allows people to actually do their work effectively and manage it. Well, that ends my section of the content. And now I would like to hand this over to Michael Douglas, our Director of Accounts, to talk about what you can do to learn more about what we addressed today.
Thanks, Roger. I think you did a great job today of really peeling back the different layers of the problem. And it's definitely a problem that we hear about every single day from leaders like those on the call. But there's probably a lot that has to happen between understanding the problem and then pursuing the possibility of a solution. A lot of the companies that we showed earlier, our customers, have paid us several thousand to come in and lead a 2-day workshop to help them figure all this out, build a business case, and a plan to move forward. And some of you on the call today are engaged with us right now in that process. but that's probably too big of a leap from where some of you are right now. So we wanted to put something special together to help you get moving today if you would like. And we're calling it the Project Management Enhanced P2P Toolkit. So within the next few days, you're going to get an email from ENFOS containing the following. We're going to give you the recorded version of this webinar along with the accompanying presentation materials and all of the backup documentation references that Roger went over. We're also going to give you a copy of our new white paper, the business case for Project Management Enhanced P2P. And we've also designed an online readiness assessment that you and your teams can fill out on your own time. It'll help you identify what some of the pinch points might be in your process today. And then finally, we'd like to offer you a 1-hour, no strings attached, executive briefing to go over the results with you on the assessment. Even if our conversations stop there, we think this package will get you asking different questions of your teams and get you prepared to answer the questions you may be getting from your executive teams on how your organization is continuing to deliver value to the company. As I said, there's nothing you need to do to get this. We're just going to send it through the email to all the attendees for today's webinar. We appreciate your time today, and hopefully this will be a great way for us to pay it forward for that. And so with that, I want to turn it back over to Roger. I think we've got some questions that have populated that we'd like to go over and answer for you.
Yes, thanks everyone, and thanks for submitting the questions. If we don't get to your question, because we have quite a few here, we will be sending out the Q&A to the attendees. So let's do 2 or 3 of these now, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chris for some final thoughts and to talk about another special offer that we have. So one of the questions was, can you briefly describe how ENFOS integrates with a P2P system? So I can answer that question. This is something that we've done for every single one of our customers because they really are working in concert, right? They add value to each other. The purchase to pay system that you have that probably is a company-wide system with ENFOS, which is helping you manage your complex services. So that generally takes about 90 days, sometimes less, sometimes more, depending on some of the factors involved. But it's usually about a 90-day effort. That's part of the implementation phase. And it starts with technical specifications. So your engineering team, our engineering teams get together. They talk about the existing standards that are in place and the methodologies that your company wants to deploy. Could be API driven. It could be secure FTP, HTTPS posts. There are different types of transfer methodologies, and ENFOS manages them all, and including our own APIs. So that's so there's the engineering technical specification. We would also have a testing phase involved to test all of those interfaces and to get those signed off on. And there's usually, once those are on, those would be involved in user acceptance testing then with the business. Once that phase is complete, then it's basically moving those interfaces to a production environment and then aligning that with the overall go live plan. So that is kind of a high level discussion of how that happens and works. Generally what we find in those implementations, and this gets into the project management level of detail to really effectively manage and control projects, the ENFOS system has several deeper layers than what the P2P system needs. Usually, all that project management detail stays in ENFOS, but what's going over to the P2P system is a project ID, a vendor ID, maybe a scope of work description, and dollar amounts and maybe an expected delivery date with some GL account codes that are part of the chart of accounts. But all the project management level detail typically is managed and controlled and reported on in the info system, which is on the front end of that. Okay. One of the other questions that we'll answer now, this had to do with the project management enhanced P2P and the chart that we showed where there was linkage from planning to proposals to purchases to invoices. And the question really was, how do you make that happen? Well, that's a great question, and that is actually would be a pretty long answer, but let me try to shorten it. At least from our philosophy. Our philosophy has always been that planning, purchasing, and spending need to be directly linked. Because project managers who are responsible for all of those transactions and process activities need real-time data to make the best decisions at the right time. So we've always felt like that if I'm approving spending and it's on an invoice and I have details at a project management level around task costs, open amounts, billed to date, quantities provided, quantities remaining, and so on, that once that materializes as an invoice and that's approved, that should immediately be reducing the plan balance. So that if I'm asked to reforecast or I need to look at a vantage point of where I'm at on my project, I have it in real time. That's from a project manager's viewpoint. But from an accounting viewpoint, there also has to be these balance determinations, in connection with the general ledger. So, ENFOS has designed and built in processes to make sure that those are staying in step, the general ledger balance as well as the ENFOS balance. And we also, want to make sure that we're not overcommitting future spend. That was one of the control checks that we talked about. And that our financial reporting can take place properly out of the ENFOS system. So we've always felt like, both from an accounting perspective as well as a project management perspective, that the invoice side of it, which is the downstream part of the financial process, needs to be linked with the upstream part, which is the planning and forecasting. Many of our customers are reforecasting either on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. Because of all those dynamics that we talked about for complex services, things are changing. Maybe we attempted a certain remedial technology and it's not working out. So we're gonna shut that down and try something else. Maybe a regulator gave us a bad determination, didn't approve the remedial strategy that we had wanted to put in place, but are forcing us to do something else. So that's a type of a trigger event. And then worst case scenarios are risk events that happen, right? We're finding contamination where we didn't think it existed. We're getting impacts to offsite properties, sensitive receptors, water wells, or so on. But that connection, right, that we're calling project management enhanced P2P, to us and to many of our customers that have been using ENFOS, believe that to be critical. There were a few more questions, but I think what I'm going to do now is we'll get the rest of those emailed out to all the attendees, and I'm going to hand this back over to Chris.
Thanks, Roger. So, as you may know, we host one of the biggest conferences in the remediation space every couple of years, the ENFOS Experience. So this is where remediation experts, thought leaders, and professionals from all over the nation will gather for 2 days of sharing best practices, emerging strategies, and real insight. So in 2017, we had an absolutely all-star lineup of speakers, some of the world's leading environmental liability management teams, companies such as CN Rail, 7-Eleven, Chemours, the U.S. Defense Logistics Agency, Total USA, Arcadis, and many more. So this year we are bringing it back. The ENFOS Experience 2019 will take place in Austin, Texas, September 24th and 25th at the new Fairmount Austin. So as a thank you for attending this webinar, we're giving you the pre-early bird pricing for when registration opens around early April. So we're going to be sending you a follow-up email with the relevant information. You're going to be able to be locked in at the lowest possible registration price. So this event is obviously a huge highlight for us, but is the value that you get as an attendee, being in the room with some of the brightest and most innovative minds in the field, that really makes an event like this worth attending. So year after year, we get real feedback from people that have left the conference with actionable ideas, strategies that they've implemented at their companies and have seen significant results. We like to keep the presentations short and engaging, around 20 minutes, so you'll never feel that death by PowerPoint. And the Fairmont is a gorgeous event space. So we're also bringing back breakout sessions, so you can zero in on presentations that are relevant to your specific interests. We also have a very interesting keynote speaker this year in Jim Davidson. He's a New York Times bestselling author and a longtime environmental professional with an amazing life or death survival story. So it's going to be a very, very special event. Keep a lookout in your inbox in the next few days, and we hope to see you in Austin in September. So that wraps up the webinar. Thank you everybody for attending, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.